Well, welcome again. It seems like it's been a while, and it has been a while, but we're back for tonight. But then next week, spring break. So, and then I think we'll have a few weeks in a row where we won't be interrupted by anything. But we will kind of pick up from where we were a couple weeks ago, and then we'll have spring break, and then I think we'll have almost a full month then of uninterrupted to finish up Samuel. But if it seems like it's been a long time since we were together, we'll do just a little brief recap. But before I forget, Janine said I should mention if you have Amazon Prime, and I don't know if some of you there is a mini series on there called House of David, and she's been watching that. I haven't had a chance to watch it yet, but I saw maybe a few minutes of it. But she says it's really good, and of course they add a lot, and they dramatize a lot, and they speculate a lot. It's not just word for word out of the Bible, but she does say it's really pretty good. But so take that for what it's worth, and if you want to try it out, if you have Amazon Prime, it'll probably go right along with what we've been talking about, and they'll probably take some side roads and some other things with it as well. So if you remember last time, we had talked about Saul visiting the witch of Endor because he was getting ready to go into battle against the Philistines. He had asked for direction from the Lord. He'd received silence. And so he, in a rather desperate ploy, even though witchcraft was obviously and seances and all that were totally against the law and outlawed and forbidden, he went to a witch, a sorceress, a medium, and asked her to conjure up the spirit of Samuel. And as we said last week, or 2 weeks ago, whether this was actually in some way some supernatural thing, or whether she was a faker, like I think all mediums are today, or exactly what was going on. But the message he received from this witch or medium or sorceress or whatever you want to call her was that he would die in battle the next day. And that sort of knocked him low, as you might expect, because he totally believed it and still knew he had to go face the Philistines. Meanwhile, David, who had been pretending to be loyal to the Philistine commander there in Gath, and was afraid he was going to be forced to go into battle against his own people, was conveniently dismissed and not having to do that because the other commanders did not trust him, with good reason, obviously, because David had been pretending to be loyal to the Philistine commander of one of the cities, telling them that he'd been raiding the Israelite encampments, when in reality he had been raiding marauding bands of desert nomads, and then claiming when he brought back the spoils that it had come from Israel and Judah, when in reality he had never attacked his own people. But he had been hiding out among the Philistines. And now we come to that battle that had been forecast to include the death of Saul. So that's where we picked up. We picked up right before the last chapter of 1 Samuel. And it said, chapter 31, verse 1, "Now the Philistines fought against Israel. The Israelites fled before them, and many fell slain on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines pressed hard after Saul and his sons, and they killed his sons Jonathan, Abinadab, and Melchishua. The fighting grew fierce around Saul, and when the archers overtook him, they wounded him critically." So Jonathan, David's best friend, Jonathan's like a brother to him that has been featured in this, with a pretty brief mention here in one verse, he and two of the other sons of Saul are killed in this battle. And now Saul himself is wounded, as I said, critically. So chapter 31:4. "Saul said to his armor bearer, 'Draw your sword and run me through, or these uncircumcised fellows will come and run me through and abuse me.'" In other words, Saul realizes he has no hope of surviving this battle. He's afraid that if he is cornered by the Philistines, they will not give him a swift death, that they will torture him before they kill him. And, as anyone would want to avoid that, He doesn't want to be tortured, and so he tells his armor bearer, this young man who would accompany him and carry some of his weapons, he says, "You kill me now, quickly, or I don't want to be killed by the Philistines. I don't want to be tortured by them. I don't want it to be said that I was killed by an uncircumcised Philistine. So kill me now." But continuing with that verse, but the armor bearer was terrified and would not do it. He's not going. He's a young man, probably a teenager. The king has just said, "Kill me." He can't make himself do that. He's not willing to do that. So Saul took his own sword and fell on it. And you've heard the expression, of course, to fall on your sword. Sometimes is meant literally, often meant, somebody taking the blame for something. And, a company, if somebody has to take the blame for the failure of a project or a company, we say they fell on their sword. Well, here Saul literally does that. He falls on his sword. And then it says in verse 5, when the armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he too fell on his sword and died with him. So he was too afraid to kill Saul, but after Saul kills or falls on himself, he probably realizing that with the Philistines surrounding them, he does not want to suffer that fate either of torture, and so he takes his own life as well. So Saul and his 3 sons and his armor bearer and all his men died together that same day. So this is a disastrous battle for Saul. It is also a disastrous battle for Israel, and it is what the witch, the medium, said would happen. Saul and 3 of his sons, including Jonathan, David's best friend, all die in battle that day. Now, we might say, was that all of Saul's sons? Well, we're going to find out. No, not all but one. So this is Saul and 3 of his 4 sons are killed that day. Verse 7, when the Israelites along the valley and those across the Jordan saw that the Israelite army had fled and that Saul and his sons had died, they abandoned their towns and fled, and the Philistines came and occupied them. So, if you remember where we were before they had a king, where was Israel before Saul was anointed as a king? When they said, give us a king to fight our battles, give us a king. They were pretty much occupied by and surrounded by the Philistines. The Philistines had often occupied their lands and were lording it over them. And part of the reason they wanted a king was to be able to have someone to fight their battles against the Philistines. And now with the death of Saul and so many of the men of his soldiers, it seems like it's come back full circle. And once again, the Philistines are in a power position over Israel. That Saul, as a valiant warrior and a good soldier, had been able to kind of keep the Philistines at bay for most of the time of his reign. But now it all sort of collapses in on Israel with the death of Saul and his sons and his men. And it says the Philistines came and occupied them there in verse 7. The next day, when the Philistines came to strip the dead, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. They cut off his head, this is Saul's head, stripped off his armor, and they sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to proclaim the news in the temple of their idols and among their people. They put his armor in the temple of the Ashtoreths and fastened his body to the wall of Beth-shan. So, when we went to Israel in 2019, we went to Beth-shan, and they pointed out that this was where the body of Saul had been displayed, headless, by the Philistines. Then, verse 11, when the people of Jabesh Gilead heard of what the Philistines had done to Saul, all their valiant men journeyed through the night to Beth-shan. Where have we heard of that group? Where have we heard of Jabesh Gilead before? It's been a while. Where have we heard of them before? Huh? Well, go back to chapter 11. If you go back to verse 11, this is when the Ammonites went and besieged Jabesh Gilead. And you remember they said, make a treaty with us and we'll be your subjects. The men of Jabesh said to them, to the Ammonites, we'll be your subjects. And then the leader of the Ammonites said, well, yeah, but I'm going to gouge out the right eye of every single person, so to bring disgrace upon you. And remember the call went out, and they gave them just basically a day. Or they gave them 7 days to decide, are you going to let us occupy you and gouge out your eye, or are we going to come in and just massacre you? And then verse 4 of 11, when the messengers came to Gibeah of Saul and reported these terms, they all wept aloud, and Saul was returning, and blah, blah, blah. And verse 6, Saul heard the words, and the Spirit of God came upon him in power, and he burned with anger, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then verse 9, he says, you're going to be delivered. And long story short, Saul rescues that city from the Ammonites. So the Ammonites had not forgotten that Saul and his men had rescued them from the Ammonites. So when the men of that town hear that Saul has been killed, his body has been taken, he's been beheaded, and they've hung his body on the walls of the Philistine city as a way to further bring disgrace and shame and celebrate his death, it says, when the people, now back to chapter 31, verse 11, when the people of Jabesh Gilead heard of what the Philistines had done to Saul, all their valiant men journeyed through the night to Bethshan. They took down the bodies of Saul and his sons from the wall of Bethshan and went to Jabesh, where they burned them. Then they took their bones and buried them under a tamarisk tree at Jabesh, and they fasted 7 days. So they, in gratitude for what Saul had done for them, they did not want to see his body displayed as a trophy of war. And in the middle of the night, they snuck there, got his body, took it back, gave it a proper burial. So, which is a reminder that, we've been reading about Saul's jealousy and his, obsession with catching David, and this obsession with David is after his throne, and how Saul, we've been reading about just how kind of crazy Saul was. But remember, as I said before, he was not a good king, but he was a good soldier. And he did, fight many battles for Israel, and some of them at least successful. And so he wasn't totally unpopular. There were places where Saul was pretty popular. There were places where he was still revered, like this city, where they remembered that Saul had come and rescued them. So even though we've been focusing on this sort of small relationship between Saul and David and Jonathan and all that sort of inner family struggle, to the wider community, many of them are still pretty content with Saul. Many of them are pretty favorable towards Saul, and they've been told propaganda that David is after his throne and David is trying to usurp him and all those kinds of things. So, the opinions about these two, about David and Saul, are not universal. Now, I don't need to visit the rest of them again, but I do need a stool. Unfortunately, my hip is still not what it could be or should be. So let me grab something a little bit, give myself a little bit of a place to, unfortunately, so I won't be too distracted by by pain. The injection I got in my hip was helpful, but if I stand up for very long, it still is not great. So I'm going to sit for a little bit today, and some days it's better than others since I got that. But anyway, so Saul is dead, and Jonathan is dead. Israel is defeated. The Philistines are occupying. And we go to 2 Samuel, but In the original Hebrew, it's all one book. It's just the book of Samuel. It was only divided into two books when they translated it into Greek. When they translated the Old Testament book of Samuel into Greek, they divided it into two books. So the division between 1st and 2nd Samuel is an artificial separation. In a Hebrew Bible, it just is the book of Samuel. And because for a long, long time, the Bible that was the most read Bible was what was called the Septuagint, which was the Greek translation of the Old Testament. It was called the Septuagint. I think I told you why, because what they said was that 70 elders took the Hebrew Bible and translated it into Greek, and when they came together, all 70 of them had translated it exactly the same way. That story maybe isn't totally true, but that's why they call it the Septuagint, which means 70 elders. So the Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. And in the Hebrew Bible, it's just the book of Samuel. But in the Greek, it was 1st and 2nd Samuel. And then when they first started translating the Bible into English, often, since Greek is a lot easier than Hebrew, often they use the Septuagint to get to the English translation instead of going back all the way to the Hebrew. And of course, scholars since then have, gone back to the original Hebrew. I mentioned, in my sermon how there's a verse in John that is not there anymore because they discovered in the oldest books of John, oldest manuscripts of John, that verse isn't there, and so that's why modern Bibles don't have it. But someone said they looked in their Bible that was published in 1950, it was there. Modern scholarship has done a lot in the 75 years since then. There's a whole field of biblical scholarship that says, let's find the oldest possible manuscript we have, copy that we have of these books of the Bible, and see how they match up with more recent copies. And when I say copies, for the entire Bible, all 66 books, in no case do we have the original. We do not have the original manuscript of any book of the Bible. All we have are copies. And it's which copy is the oldest copy. We don't have any of Paul's handwritten letters. We don't have Matthew's original manuscript, and on and on and on. All we have are copies. And so it becomes a matter of what's the most authoritative and oldest copy we can find. And in the Middle Ages, when the copies they had were maybe from the 7th or 8th or 9th century. Modern scholarship, especially through discoveries like the Dead Sea Scrolls, things like that, have found copies that are much, much, much older and therefore much more reliable. The marvelous thing is when you compare the Old Testament books that were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are from around the time of Jesus, to copies that were from the 7th, 8th, 9th centuries, and they compare them, they're almost identical. In other words, the number of variations are like, a conjunction here and a adverb there and a comma here. I mean, they're extremely minor. Nothing that would change the meaning or the theology of any of the passages. They're very, very minor, little tiny discrepancies. But which is why we can say the people who copied the scriptures were extremely careful. They did this with extreme care, which is why when scholars are trying to discover what's the oldest manuscript we have, they're looking for very small variations. And that's why the Dead Sea Scrolls is such a treasure, because they found it was so similar in almost every word for word as the more later copies that we had access to. So anyway, that's a whole field of study that I had to understand it in seminary, but I thought there's people who do this their whole lives, that's their whole focus of their whole career is doing that, studying these ancient manuscripts. And I'm like, well, I'm glad somebody else is doing that, because it sounds pretty tedious to me, but I'm glad there's somebody who's on top of that. So we turn the page to 2 Samuel 1, but we're really just turning the page to the next part of the same book. So 2 Samuel 1. After the death of Saul, David returned from defeating the Amalekites. Remember, when David and his men were pretending to be in the Philistine army, the Amalekites came and raided the village where they were staying and took away their wives and children and property. And then David had to go after them and had to recover all of the women and all the children and all the bounty. And then they killed the raiders and took their stuff too. So they ended up with even more stuff than they started with, if you remember that part of the story. So David returned from defeating the Amalekites. They were the ones who raided the town where David and his men were staying, and stayed in Ziklag, that's the name of the town, 2 days. On the third day, a man arrived from Saul's camp with his clothes torn and with dust on his head. And when he came to David, he fell to the ground to pay him honor. "Where have you come from?" David asked him. He answered, "I have escaped from the Israelite camp." "What happened?" David asked. "Tell me." So David is unaware of what happened at this battle, the one where Saul was killed. David didn't know anything about it. What happened? He said, "The men fled from the battle. Many of them fell and died, and Saul and his son Jonathan are dead." So this is David's first hearing of this. David said to the young man who brought him the report, "How do you know that Saul and his son Jonathan are dead?" How do you know this for fact? News and gossip and report. How do you know this for fact? "I happened to be on Mount Gilboa," the young man said, "and there was Saul leaning on his spear with chariots and riders almost upon him. When he turned around and saw me, he called out to me, and I said, 'What can I do?' And he asked me, 'Who are you?' 'An Amalekite,' I answered. He said to me, 'Stand over me and kill me. I'm in the throes of death, but I'm still alive.' So I stood over him and killed him, because I knew that after he had fallen, he could not survive." What's wrong? What's wrong here? That's not what happened, is it? That's not what happened. At least it's a very different story than we just read in the last chapter, which is all part of the same book. It said, last chapter said Saul was wounded with arrows. He asked his armor bearer to kill him and finish him off. The armor bearer wouldn't do it. He took out his sword and fell on his sword. And then the armor bearer fell on his sword. And then the Philistines came along, cut off his head, etc., etc., etc. Here this fellow tells a whole different story. So I stood over him and I killed him, because I knew that after he'd fallen, he couldn't survive. And I took the crown that was on his head and the band on his arm and have brought them here to my Lord. So he says, I came upon him. He asked me to kill him, so I did. And then I took his crown and, the thing on his arm, the sign, again, of royalty, and I brought them to you, David, because it's obvious you're going to be the king now. When David and all his men with him took a hold of their clothes and tore them. I mentioned in Hebrew civilization, when people hear tragic news, one of the signs of mourning and grief is to rip your clothes. Put ashes on your head, rip your clothes. I remember at least in one of the movie versions of the Passion of Christ, the trial of Jesus before the Sanhedrin. If you remember the moment in the Sanhedrin, at least in this movie, it has, Jesus is, they're making all these accusations against Jesus, and he's just being silent. And finally, the high priest says, In the name of the Holy One, I command you to answer, are you the Messiah? Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? And Jesus says, I am. And they all rip their clothes. They all rip their clothes at Jesus saying that, because he has committed blasphemy from their perspective. So when David hears that Saul and Jonathan are dead, he rips his clothes. We're in 2 Samuel 1:11. 2 Samuel 1:11. So David and his men with him took hold of their clothes and tore them. They mourned and wept and fasted till evening for Saul and his son Jonathan, and for the army of the Lord and the house of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. So David said to the young man who brought him the report, where are you from? I'm the son of an alien, an Amalekite, he answered. Who had David just finished polishing off? The Amalekites. David asked him, why were you not afraid to lift your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed? In other words, did you have no fear to kill the king of Israel? At which I'm picturing the Amalekite going, at that point. Then David called one of his men and said, go, strike him down. So he struck him down, and he died. For David had said to him, your blood will be on your own head. With your own mouth you testified against yourself when you said, I killed the king's anointed. Now, what do we think really happened here? In some ways, it's impossible to know for absolute. So what do you think happened here? Yeah, because it was no secret that Saul had been after David, that Saul and David were enemies, at least supposedly, and that some wanted David to be the king, and he thought, if I bring him this crown, he's going to give me a reward, right? He's going to give me a reward for bringing him the crown. So if the last chapter of 1 Samuel is the truthful account of how Saul died, how did he get the crown? Yeah. Well, is it possible that, that Saul fell on his sword and died? The armor bearer fell on his sword and died. And before the Philistines could get there to cut off his head and strip the body and all that this fellow saw it, grabbed the crown, grabbed the arm piece, and said, I'm going to bring this to David and I'll get a reward. And then he made up this story thinking David is going to be so happy, and, I put him out of his misery, he was suffering and I put him out of his ministry, and they'll be so grateful that I did that. And instead, he gets the totally opposite reaction. David, remember, when David had two opportunities to kill Saul, and his men was like, you had him right, he was in the cave right there, you could have killed him. And the other time, he's asleep on the ground and you got the spear right here. They would think, kill him. And David said, who am I to kill the Lord's anointed? Who am I to kill the one chosen by God to be the king? Because God did select Saul. So David keeps saying, I'm not going to kill him. I'm not going to kill the Lord's anointed, even if I have him right in my hands. I'm not going to do that. So now here this fellow comes along and says, yeah, I killed him. And David's like, what made you think you could kill the king? And that's, David has him killed. And as we read the account, one of these accounts is not correct. And I think we're led to believe that this guy's story is only half true. He probably did indeed come across Saul and take his crown. I think that part of it's true. But the whole rest of his story is a little shady. And I don't know if David didn't believe the story or if he just was like, you killed the king. I don't care if he was suffering. I don't care. You just said you killed the king. And so I'm going to kill you. So David kills him. So David took up, verse 17, 2 Samuel 1:17. David took up this lament concerning Saul and his son Jonathan and ordered that the men of Judah be taught this lament of the bow, as it is written in the book of Jashar. And now this is a lament. This is it's like a psalm, except it's a psalm of mourning. It's a poem or a song that David composes to commemorate the death of Saul and Jonathan. Because remember, David respected the office of king. He respected the fact that Saul was chosen by God to be the king. And of course, David loved his best friend Jonathan. So he composes a lament, which is a song of sorrow, just like the book in the Bible, Lamentations. Lamentations is a lament, a song of sorrow. So here's the song of sorrow. Your glory, O Israel, lies slain on your heights. How the mighty have fallen. There's another little phrase that occasionally pops up places, how the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath. Proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon. Lest the daughters of the Philistines be glad, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised rejoice. Now, again, you might say, they're going to find out. The Philistines are having a big party about this. The Philistines are dancing in the streets about having killed Saul and his men. But this is a poem. And they're like, let there not be rejoicing for the death of the great king. Don't let there be dancing. Don't let their women rejoice. Don't let the story be told, even though obviously the story's going to be told. O mountains of Gilboa, may you have neither dew nor rain, nor fields that yield offerings of grain. For there the shield of the mighty was defiled, the shield of Saul no longer rubbed with oil. Again, is it never going to rain on the place of Gilboa again? Yeah, it's going to rain there again. This is all poetry. This is not literally laying a curse on that land. This is all hyperbole and poetic language. From the blood of the slain, from the flesh of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back. The sword of Saul did not return unsatisfied. In other words, they didn't go down. They went down fighting. They went down in battle. Saul and Jonathan, in life they were loved and gracious. In death they were not parted. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. Again, not literally. O daughters of Israel, weep for Saul, who clothed you in scarlet and finery, who adorned your garments with ornaments of gold. In other words, Saul brought wealth to Israel. How the mighty have fallen in battle. Jonathan lies slain on your heights. I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women. How the mighty have fallen. The weapons of war have perished. So this is a song, poem that he now composes, and it says, if you go back to verse 18, or verse 17, Paul took up this lament concerning Saul and his son Jonathan and ordered that the men of Judah be taught this lament of the bow. So, in other words, he wants others to learn this lament. This lament is for it to be taught, spoken through the towns, and people to hear it and memorize it and repeat it. This lament for David and Jonathan. Notice he doesn't mention the other two sons, but they're to him not nearly as important as Saul and Jonathan. So now you might say, okay, David is no longer being pursued by Saul. And you might think, well, okay, now David's king. No, it's not, not that quick or that easy. It doesn't happen that quick or that easy. In the course of time, David inquired of the Lord, shall I go up to one of the towns of Judah? In other words, remember, he'd been sort of hiding out in Philistine territory in this place called Ziklag. Now, where is he going to go live? He's going to go back to his home tribe, his home territory, the tribe of Judah. But he asked the Lord, shall I go back to Judah? Yes. The Lord said, go up. David asked, where shall I go? To Hebron, the Lord answered. So and Hebron is a town in Judah, the tribe of Judah, the territory of Judah. So David went up there with his 2 wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, remember her? The widow of Nabal of Carmel, Nabal the fool, Nabal the rude and, man who died of a heart failure after he snubbed David. So he got the 2 wives, Ahinoam and Abigail. David also took the men who were with him. This band of men that had been his little army, his army that had stayed with him through all of this, each with his family, and they settled in Hebron and its towns. Then the men of Judah came to Hebron, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. So David now does become the king of Judah, which is the largest of the tribes, but it's only one tribe. It's the southern tribe of Judah. That's his home tribe, Judah. But so now he is king of Judah, but he's not the king of the whole country now. He's not the king of all of Israel yet. He's only the king of Judah. When David was told it was the men of Jabesh-Gilead who had buried Saul, he sent messengers to the men of Jabesh-Gilead, that's the guys, remember, that Saul had rescued, to say to them, the Lord bless you for showing this kindness to Saul, your master, by burying him. May the Lord now show you kindness and faithfulness, and I too will show you the same favor because you've done this. Now then, be strong and brave, for Saul your master is dead, and the house of Judah has anointed me king over them. So, again, he offers thanks to these men who had kept the body of Saul from being desecrated and paraded around. But, as I said, 3 of Saul's sons died in battle. But Saul had 4 sons. Meanwhile, Abner, son of Ner, that's what Abner actually means. Abner means the son of Ner, or Ner. Abner, son of Ner, the commander of Saul's army, had taken Ishbosheth, son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim. Now, Abner is Saul's general, the leader of his army. Abner is also Saul's first cousin. Abner is Saul's uncle's son. Okay. So Abner is Saul's first cousin and the commander of his army. Abner, son of Ner, the commander of Saul's army, had taken Ishbosheth, son of Saul, and brought him to Mahanaim. Saul has 1 son left, Ishbosheth. And he meaning Abner, made him king over Gilead, Ashuri, and Jezreel, and also over Ephraim, Benjamin, and all Israel. So Abner, Saul's cousin and commander of his army, takes the one remaining son of Saul and declares that he is now the king of the northern tribes. The king, Judah has chosen David, but now Abner says, well, there's only one heir left. He's now succeeded Saul. He's now the new king. Ishbosheth, son of Saul, was 40 years old when he became king over Israel, and he reigned 2 years. The house of Judah, however, followed David. The length of time David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months. And you might say, no, wait, well, what happened in the interim? And there's no, frankly, we're not sure. The timeline doesn't always add up, but so don't worry too much about that. Just understand, David is king of the south, and Ishbosheth is now the king of the north. But you're going to see who's really in charge of the north is Abner. Abner is really the one running the north. And Ishbosheth is his puppet. So Abner, the head of the military, is really, we're going to see, is really the one in charge up north. And he has made Ishbosheth king. But Ishbosheth is not a strong person, not a strong leader. So, Abner, son of Ner, together with the men of Ishbosheth, son of Saul, left Mahanaim and went to Gibeon. Joab, son of Zeruiah, and David's men went out and met them at the pool of Gibeon. Joab is David's commander of David's army. Joab is David's nephew. Okay? Because remember, David is the youngest of all the sons. So one of his big brother's sons is now his commander of his army. And so it's a good chance that they're not that different in age, considering that David is the youngest of all the 7 sons. So just keeping it straight, Abner is Saul's cousin and the head of his army. Joab is David's nephew and the commander of his army. Okay, so you keep these two personalities straight because they're both going to come into a lot of focus over the next few chapters. Abner and Joab. They meet. the two generals, the two commanders, they meet. It says, back to 12. Abner, son of Ner, together with the men of Ishbosheth, son of Saul, left Mahanaim and went to Gibeon. Joab, son of Zeruiah, and David's men went out and met them at the pool of Gibeon. One group sat on one side of the pool, and the other group on the other side of the pool. So this is like you got 2 kings. You got a divided territory now. You got the 2 generals sitting down across from each other with some of their men. And Abner, which is Saul's man, Abner says to Joab, "Let's have some of the young men get up and fight hand to hand in front of us." "All right, let's do it," said Joab. And the idea is, all right, well, and it's a little, in the Hebrew, as I read, it's a little, is this a wrestling match or is this a fight to the death? And it's kind of unclear how it starts. Does it start as more just a kind of a let's let them kind of tussle it up, or let's let them fight to the death? Because this whole idea of representative combat is actually common in the ancient world. We just, at the beginning of this, we read a story about it where the Philistines and the Israelites each chose one person to fight it out, David and Goliath. Now they say, let's let some of our young guys fight it out. And this is Abner's idea. And Joab's like, all right. So they stood up and counted off. 1, 2, 3. 12 men for Benjamin and Ishbosheth, son of Saul. Remember, that's the home tribe for Saul, was the tribe of Benjamin. 12 men for Benjamin and Ishbosheth, 12 for David, who are probably going to be from Judah. Each man grabbed his opponent by the head and thrust his dagger into his opponent's side. Well, that didn't last long. So they killed each other pretty quickly. And they fell down together. So the young men with their daggers got into close combat and stabbed each other, and they're dead. And so they called that place the Field of Daggers. They called it Helkath Hazarim, which means the Field of Daggers. So now you got 24 young guys dead. So the next sentence is something now just to realize. 17, the battle was very fierce. Okay, so now it turns into a full-on battle between the the two generals and their men, between Abner and the men loyal to the family of Saul, and Joab and the men loyal to David. It turns into a full-on skirmish. And Abner and the men of Israel were defeated by David's men. The three sons of Zeruiah were there: Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. Now, remember, Joab, Abishai, and Asahel are sons of Zeruiah. Who is Zeruiah? One of David's brothers. Because Joab is David's nephew. Okay? So these are three of David's nephews. All three brothers. Now, Asahel was as fleet-footed as a wild gazelle. He chased Abner. So, one of David's men starts chasing the general of the other side, Abner, turning neither to the right or to the left as he pursued him. And Abner looked behind him and said, "Is that you, Asahel?" They know each other. "It is," he answered. Abner said to him, "Turn aside to the right or to the left. Take on one of the young men and strip him of his weapons." In other words, you dare not come after me. I'm the general. I'm in charge here. Stop chasing me. But Asahel would not stop chasing him. Again, Abner warned Asahel, "Stop chasing me. Why should I strike you down? How could I look your brother Joab in the face?" But Asahel refused to give up the pursuit. So Abner thrust the butt of his spear into Asahel's stomach. Notice he doesn't poke him with the spear part. I mean, the idea is, at least I think possibly, hit him with the blunt end, so that's going to knock him down, but maybe not kill him. But the spear came out through his back, so it goes all the way through him. He fell there and died on the spot. And every man stopped when he came to the place where Asahel had fallen and died. So now, the commander of David's army, his brother, has been killed by the commander of Saul's son's army. But the commander of Saul's son's army kept saying, "Don't do it. Don't do it. Stop chasing me. Stop chasing me." But he wouldn't stop. And so, Abner, being the much more experienced warrior, killed him. But Asa refused to give up the pursuit. Abner thrust the butt of his spear into Asahel's stomach, and the spear came out through his back. He fell there and died on the spot. And everyone stopped when he came to the place where Asa had fallen and died. But Joab and Abishai pursued Abner. And as the sun was setting, they came to the hill of Ammah, near Giah, on the way to the wasteland of Gibeon. Then the men of Benjamin rallied behind Abner. They formed themselves into a group and took their stand on top of the hill. And Abner called out to Joab. So Abner, on the side of the family of Saul, calls out to Joab, David's commander and nephew, "Must the sword devour forever? Don't you realize that this will end in bitterness? How long before you order your men to stop pursuing their brothers?" Joab answered, "As surely as God lives, if you had not spoken, the men would have continued the pursuit of their brothers until morning." So Joab blew the trumpet, and all the men came to a halt. They no longer pursued Israel, nor did they fight anymore. And all that night, Abner and his men marched through the Arabah. They crossed the Jordan, continued through the whole Bithron, and came to Mahanaim. So they averted full-scale warfare before it escalated anymore. But realize there is now bad blood between Abner and Joab. Abner has killed Joab's brother. And that's going to be something that's going to continue to be an issue. Then Joab returned from pursuing Abner and assembled all his men. Besides Asahel, 19 of David's men were found missing. But David's men had killed 360 Benjamites who were with Abner. 360 versus 19. They took Asahel and buried him in his father's tomb at Bethlehem. Then Joab and his men marched all night and arrived at Hebron by daybreak. So this sets up David versus Ishbosheth. But what it really sets up is David versus Abner. Because Abner is really the one controlling things. Ishbosheth is his puppet. The war between the house of Saul and the house of David lasted a long time. David grew stronger and stronger, and the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker. Now, sons were born to David in Hebron. The firstborn was Amnon, son of Ahinoam of Jezreel. His second, Chileab, son of Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. The third, Absalom, the son of Maacah, daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. Absalom, that name, sadly, that name is going to become very important later on. Absalom is going to be, spoiler alert, Absalom is going to rebel against David. This is the one who's going to be the rebellious son. The fourth, Adonijah, son of Haggith. The fifth, Shephatiah, son of Abitial. The sixth, Ithream, son of David's wife, Eglah. They're born to David. So David starts producing sons. Now, this is where, politics is not new. Politics is not a new thing, I mean, if you are at all, a lover of history, politics is always a part of any community, nation, country, and where the power really is, where the power is and where it really is. Where's the power behind the throne? Who's really pulling the strings? Where are the loyalties? Do loyalties shift? Do loyalties stay? I mean, this is a political part of this story. During the war between the house of Saul and the house of David, Abner had been strengthening his own position in the house of Saul. Okay? Abner is, as I said, the power behind Ishbosheth. Now Saul had a concubine named Rizpah, daughter of Aiah. Concubine is a woman in the harem. Kings had harems, or really harems. Kings had harems. This was where they had wives and they had harems. And the harems were there for the pleasure of the king. Saul had a concubine named Rizpah. And Ishbosheth said to Abner, his general, "Why did you sleep with my father's concubine?" And they say, "Why is that a problem?" Well, when a king died, to sleep with one of his harem girls was a way of saying, I now assert myself as the new king. To sleep with one of the members of the king's harem was to say, I am now pushing myself forward. I now possess what once belonged to the king. I am now in charge. So, for Abner to sleep with a harem girl, one of Saul's harem girls, one of his concubines, was an act of saying, I've got control here. It's not about sex at all. It's all about power. Abner was very angry because of what Ishbosheth said, and he answered, Am I a dog's head? On Judah's side, this very day I'm loyal to the house of your father Saul and to his family and friends. I haven't handed you over to David, and now you accuse me of an offense involving this woman? In other words, don't you realize I could have handed you over to David? Don't you realize that I'm really the one in power here? And now you're quibbling with me over a woman? And you can see, again, who's speaking to whom in harsh terms here. May God deal with Abner, be it ever so severely, if I don't do for David what the Lord promised him on an oath, and transfer the kingdom from the house of Saul and establish David's throne over Israel and Judah from Dan to Beersheba, which is north to south. Ishbosheth didn't dare say another word to Abner because he was afraid of him. So, again, just shows where the power really is. And now, Abner has basically said, if I go over to the other side, if I give my loyalty over to David instead of to you, you're done for. If I switch sides, what are you going to do? And Ishbosheth knows that's exactly true. Then Abner sent messengers on his behalf to say to David, whose land is it? Make an agreement with me, and I will help you bring all Israel over to you. So Abner says, I've got the power to unite the entire country under you, David. If I come over to your side, I can convince all of the leaders of the other tribes to fall in line and accept you as the king of the whole country. Good, said David. I'll make an agreement with you, but I demand one thing of you. Do not come into my presence unless you bring Michal, daughter of Saul, when you come to see me. What had happened to Michal? Right. When David fled from Saul, Saul took his daughter Michal, who was married to David. Remember, David had won her when Saul had said, bring me the foreskins of 100 Philistines and you can have my daughter Michal as your wife. David went out with his men, brought him back 200 foreskins of Philistines. Michal became David's wife. But once David fled from Saul, and left his wife Michal behind, Saul took his daughter Michal and gave her to another man. So David said, if you're going to come over to my side, don't come without bringing my wife. Don't you come without bringing Michal to me. Then David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, son of Saul, demanding, give me my wife Michal, whom I betrothed to myself for the price of 100 Philistine foreskins. So Ishbosheth gave orders and had her taken away from her husband, Paltiel, son of Laish. This is the second husband that Saul had given her to. Her husband, however, went with her, weeping behind her all the way to Bahurim. So he just yanked her away from her new husband to give back to David. Now, was it because David loved Michal so much? No. It was all politics. Why was it important for him to have Michal back? Because she's Saul's daughter. And that shows continuity. That shows the new king, David, of the north, if he's going to become the king of the whole country, he's married to the old king's daughter. He doesn't give, it's not like, oh, I miss Michal so much. He's got like all these other wives now too. It's not like, oh, I miss Michal so much. It's all politics. And Michal is a pawn, and her second husband is a pawn. They're all just pawns in all of this. They're all just chess pieces. So he brings back Michal to David. So her second husband went with her, weeping behind her all the way to Bahurim. And Abner said to him, "Go back home." And so he went back. Abner conferred with the elders of Israel and said, "For some time you have wanted to make David your king. Now, do it. For the Lord promised David, by my servant David, I will rescue my people of Israel from the hand of the Philistines and from the hand of all their enemies." So Abner starts advocating with the northern tribes to accept David as the king of the whole country. Abner also spoke to the Benjamites, which is Saul's tribe, in person. He went to Hebron to tell David everything that Israel and the whole house of Benjamin wanted to do. When Abner, who had 20 men with him, came to David at Hebron, David prepared a feast for him and his men. And Abner said to David, "Let me go at once and assemble all Israel for my lord and king, so that they may make a compact with you, and that you may rule over all that your heart desires." So David sent Abner away, and he went in peace. Everything's all going to be hunky-dory now, right? Everything he's got. Abner is going to bring the whole northern tribes over to him now. Just then, David's men and Joab returned from a raid and brought with them a great deal of plunder. Joab wasn't there when David met with Abner. Joab wasn't there when David met with Abner. But Abner was no longer with David in Hebron because David had sent him away, and he had gone in peace. When Joab and all the soldiers with him arrived, he was told that Abner, son of Ner, had come to the king, and that the king had sent him away, and that he had gone in peace. Hey, Joab, you know who was here? Abner was here. The king treated him like an honored guest. Oh, really? So Joab went to the king and said, "What have you done? Look, Abner came to you. Why'd you let him go? Now he's gone. You know Abner, son of Ner. He came to deceive you and observe your movements and find out everything you're doing. You can't trust him. He's your enemy. He's working for the other side. How could you let him go? How come you didn't kill him on the spot? What's wrong with you?" Joab then left David and sent messengers to Abner, and they brought him back from the well of Sirah. So Joab sends messengers to Abner and says, hey, David didn't know about it. And when Abner, so Joab sends messengers to Abner saying, hey, come back. We need to finish this negotiation. Come back. Let's get together. Come on back. And Abner's like, "Oh, okay." Now, when Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside into the gateway, as though to speak with him privately. And there, to avenge the blood of his brother Asahel, Joab stabbed him in the stomach, and he died. So, politics is also personal. Politics is also personal. And sometimes, if one leader doesn't like another leader, they might do something rash. They might do something foolish. And politics has been politics for a long, long time. So later, when David heard about this, he said, "I and my kingdom are forever innocent before the Lord concerning the blood of Abner, son of Ner." In other words, I had nothing to do with this. I was not in the loop. I did not have him killed. I did not have him killed. May his blood fall upon the head of Joab and upon all his father's house. May Joab's house never be without someone who has a running sore or leprosy, or who leans on a crutch, who falls by the sword, or who lacks food." Then, just in case we forgot, the author reminds us, Joab and his brother Abishai murdered Abner because he had killed their brother Asahel in the battle of Gibeon. Yeah, we remember that. But just in case we hadn't remembered that, they remind us as to why he killed him. Then David said to Joab and all the people with him, "Tear your clothes and put on sackcloth and walk in mourning in front of Abner." King David himself walked behind the bier. They buried Abner in Hebron, and the king wept aloud at Abner's tomb, and all the people wept also. And the king sang this lament for Abner: "Should Abner have died as the lawless died? Your hands were not bound, your feet were not fettered. You fell as one falls before wicked men." And all the people wept over him again. Then they all came and urged David to eat something while it was still day. But David took an oath, saying, "May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if I taste bread or anything else before the sun sets." I can't eat over grief for this great man, Abner. I can't eat with Abner dead. And all the people took note and were pleased. Indeed, everything the king did pleased them. So on that day, all the people in all Israel knew that the king had no part in the murder of Abner, son of Ner. Then the king said to his men, "Do you not realize that a prince and a great man has fallen in Israel this day? And today, though I am the anointed king, I'm weak. And these sons of Zeruiah are too strong for me. May the Lord repay the evildoer according to his evil deeds." Now, again, is David really that shooken up about the death of Abner? Is he really so overcome with grief at the death of Abner? Well, maybe not. But he sure makes a big show of his grief over the death of Abner. Why? Yeah. Because he wants the people of the north to see very clearly that he was not the one who had him killed. That he did not order the execution of Abner. He's like, it's all on Joab. Joab did it of his own accord. He wasn't following my orders. I knew nothing about it. Now, some people of course have said, did he know about it? I mean, have wondered about were David's hands in this really clean? And I think they were. I don't think David knew about it. I don't think David ordered it. I don't think David was responsible for it. But he wanted to make it very clear to the people that I had nothing to do with it. Abner was a great guy. He was a great leader. He was a great military man, and we all mourned for him. And this is just it's all politics. I mean, I say that it's not all politics because God did choose David. I mean, and so, things continually now to fall into this, he said David would be the king, and indeed now he is, shortly after this, he is going to become the king over the whole nation. But David is very savvy in all of this, because, when Abner had said, I'll bring the north over to you, and he lobbied for him with these tribes, that was like, this is all going to work really well. And then when Joab kills Abner, that throws a huge monkey wrench into this plan. And the whole thing could have fallen apart at that point. But David realizes, I got damage control over this. And he's able to distance himself from the death of Abner, place the blame on Joab, and still come out of it with the tribes of the north feeling like, oh, he really does care. And this is going to pave the way. Now, Ishbosheth is still alive, but Ishbosheth's world is shrinking. his main enforcer is now gone over to the other, well, went over the side and is now dead. But Ishbosheth's power at this point is extremely shaky. As a matter of fact, when we come back next time, we're going to see just how shaky his power is. One thing, though, that we'll learn, just you say, there is, I said there was only one son left alive, but there is also a grandson of Saul that's still alive. Jonathan's son. So Saul's grandson, Jonathan's son, survives all of this. His name is Mephibosheth. And we'll meet him eventually, too. So, anyway. So, as I say, politics is this part of the story is highly political, and I think which shows you just how real it is. I mean, it doesn't read like it reads like a political thriller, and that's why I haven't seen the show on Amazon Prime, but my guess is I'm guessing they're going to go into all. I mean, I'm guessing it's going to cover all this because this is pretty movie-worthy kind of stuff. All this intrigue and rivalries and all this kind of stuff, and family relations and personal grudges and all this. So, but through it all, God had anointed the shepherd boy to be the king, and that's finally going to come to fruition here. So let's pray. Lord, we thank you for these stories that show us that these people were very human, just as we are, very flawed, just as we are, and yet your will was done. And we thank you for David. He was not perfect, and neither are we, but we thank you for guiding him and always guiding his path to be able to lead his people, your people, Lord. We pray in your name. Amen.